The fallout from the Matildas' exit at the 2024 Olympic Games continues as Football Australia CEO James Johnson fronted the media upon his eventual return from Paris. Rejecting unnecessary superlatives and a patient approach to finding a new coach were high on the agenda. Elsewhere, the full details of the 24-25 men's A-League fixture have been announced with a new TV schedule for the upcoming campaign. Perth and City played out an all-time Cup classic, more round of 32 action in midweek, and some transfer news on this episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast, supported by Deploy Football. My name is Lachlan Avil, and joining me today is Poletti, who was out at that presser with JJ on Sunday morning. It got delayed though, didn't it, Poletti? Something about flights coming back from Paris?
Yeah, so there was some flight delays. It was originally supposed to take place Saturday morning and got pushed back to Sunday morning. Not going to lie, I was actually quite happy with the delay because I was still recovering from the 3 a.m. start on Thursday by the time Saturday morning rolled around. So I was very happy with the delay.
Very nice. Jacob Stevens as well. Hello to you.
Hey, how you doing, Lucky?
Very good. And to round off our panel tonight is Christian Montegan. Hello. All right, so we're going to jump in. This presser from James Johnson, the CEO of Football Australia, on Sunday covered a couple of important issues off the back of the Olympics Games and, of course, the Matildas' untimely exit. Poletti, as we say, you were there. The first issue was on the topic of these pampering claims that have been doing the rounds, particularly on social media and whatnot. Now, these all started with claims that, you know, one particular person in Australian football, I'm not even going to do him the benefit of naming him, but persistently this kind of chat coming out about the Matildas being pampered is the word, and potentially not focusing on their football and believing in their own hype and all this rubbish. JJ came out pretty strong against it and stated the facts that under the recent CBA the Matildas are treated the exact same as the Socceroos. They deserve to be. There's an argument to say they performed better than the Socceroos in international football. Either way you want to look at it, these are professionals. They're being treated like professionals, and any accusation of anything different seems widely off the mark to me.
Be careful. This person will call you out in the comment section of the podcast for not using his name. Look, I mean, JJ said that scrutiny is important, right? It's part of being a global brand. It's part of being a national brand. People that aren't football people are invested emotionally in the Matildas. And so along with that comes added scrutiny. But he also, said that it had to be warranted scrutiny. If I find the quote here, we're in the big league now. This is a national brand. People care about it. When it comes to some of the language around pampering, it's actually silly. They're not being pampered, these Matildas. We're investing in this program the way we should because the players deserve to be treated like the professionals that they are. And that's exactly what it is. They're being treated the way that they deserve to be treated. Nobody cared when the Socceroos got chartered flights back from Uruguay. No one cared when they got a chartered flight back from, was it Honduras, prior to the 2018 World Cup, that two-legged playoff? Where the FA spared no expense in, making sure that everything in this plane, from, sunglasses to simulate sleep or, whatever the extra equipment was, to help them get their body clocks back to where it needed to be quicker. They spared no expense in making sure that we got to the 2018 World Cup. These are, and the Matildas are finally being the beneficiary of that. You've got to remember, it's not all that long ago that A-League women players were, remember seeing a tweet, I want to say it was from Kieran Yap, some of them were being paid $30 a week. That was only maybe a little bit longer than that, 7-8 years ago, something like that. Women's football has come a long way, and Matildas are being a beneficiary of that. It is an equal CBA, as you said. The US Soccer Federation does the same thing, but even they're investing a ton more in their women's program than what Football Australia is in the Matildas. It's 300% more. That number from James Johnson at the press conference as well. So there's still a lot of work to go, and if this is the sort of criticism, and for those on the audio podcast, quotation marks, that the Matildas are going to get now. Imagine what happens if the FA is able to invest 100% more, 200% more, 300% more in the Matildas, and by virtue the Socceroos, because I can't imagine we'll be hearing any sort of these pampering claims about the Socceroos.
No, and for context as well, those numbers that Poletti just racked off the US women's national team spend about 300% of what the Australian women's national team do. So those numbers exist in worldwide football. Jacob, when it comes to conversation around the Matildas post-tournament, it's generally fallen into two camps. And one is people being upset at the fact that people are even criticising the Matildas, which is a bit nonsensical to me. There's different kinds of criticism that we're talking about. On the pitch, the tournament was unanimously a disaster. They didn't perform as to the level that they should. And there's been some, I want to say, well-natured people trying to protect the Matildas because they are this team that Australia loves from the criticism of people complaining about their football, which is one aspect of it. But the idea that their off-field treatment has gone undeserved or they didn't live up to it, I don't even know what to say anymore. It's fantastical.
It's hypocritical is what it is, because these same people complaining that the team is pampered and stuff because of the fact that they had that chartered flight would be the same people to turn around and blame the fact that they had a poor performance on the pitch, on the fact that they had to, fly economy, or that they didn't get recovery sessions with certain, people, or they didn't get this or that. So it's what it is. It's just media sensationalism more than anything, I think. It is a team that everybody loves, the Matildas, right? And the whole country gets around them. So the best way to be able to get clicks is to play up absolutely everything that you can about them, and it's easier to get people to be outraged than it is to get them, the positive reactions from people, especially on social media. So look, while it's a bit of a shame to see it, I don't think it comes as much of a surprise. And in a weird way, I think it sort of shows that there's an increasing legitimacy to this team, because it's the sort of thing that we see attached to professional sports worldwide, where, it's a really big thing for some of these countries to have a women's team being able to sort of drum up this same controversy over a completely trivial matter that doesn't, like, it has no bearing on anything whatsoever, right? Like Poletti said, it was a case of there was no other serviced flight for them. They had to charter one. Like, what were they going to do? Just not go anywhere? Like, walk there or something? It's all just simply insane. And I think it goes to show that the Matildas now, they have a bit of legitimacy behind them, because they're drawing this criticism, about the fact that, their off-field and their on-field are linked and things like that. Nobody would have cared about this 10, 15 years ago, right? But now that, people like the Matildas, it makes sense for, the media and media personalities to be coming out with these sort of hot takes, because it's what gets attention and it's what gets traction. And I do agree with you, though, Lockie, that on the flip side, having people who are just out there completely to defend everything about what happened at the Olympics it's a bit insane in that regard, because it was not a good tournament whatsoever on field for the Tillies. Just not very good football at all, which we've spoken a lot about, of course, on this podcast. But it is, there's these two real extremes, I think, to this, and there's not a lot in the middle, which that's what's so shocking, I think, is that we've got two extremes but nobody to sort of balance it all out.
Well, Christian, let's pick up on the next point, because there are plenty of people that, I don't want to say think that any criticism of the Matildas is unfair, but very much of the point of view that, we've got to the Olympics, that should be celebrated and kind of only celebrated. Now, it comes part and parcel as you get more popular, you get more criticism, and we're talking now specifically about what you do on the field. And that is part of it. Are we being too harsh? It was a poor performance, but at the end of the day, it's mostly coming from people who want to see the Matildas push on in a positive way.
Yeah, I think in previous years, one of my criticisms, of fans of the Matildas have been this perception that, okay, just because we've arrived at the tournament, that's good enough. And there hasn't been that high expectation. But, especially since, last year at the Women's World Cup, where, we made the semi-finals, the whole country now seems to know every player of the squad more so than the Socceroos. That's how big the Matildas have become. There's now that the expectations has risen so much that I think, there's definitely people there that, in the media landscape that do expect more from them. But I still think there's some people who are just happy that the Matildas are there. I don't want to call them cheerleaders, because I think it's a different atmosphere, women's football and men's football. And there's been that sort of discussion on social media about, different atmospheres, which, I think it's a pretty silly debate, because they all have their different styles, their different, atmospheres, and that's completely fine. But yeah, in terms of, criticizing the Matildas, obviously this Olympic campaign wasn't a great one. Outclassed by two quality opposition. Zambia, you can argue we were lucky to get away with that victory, being 5-2 down. But at the end of the day, it's good to have these good discussions. That's where we want to be when we're talking about, the women's national team and, the dub in national competition. That's where we want to be. That's the place where we've worked so hard for. Poletti mentioned before that, the dub players got paid, $30 a week in the league. And now the Matildas, the national team, are getting treated the exact same as the Socceroos, which James Johnson touched on in that press conference. So I think we are making strides to, how do I say it? The quality is there. It's just about, looking ourselves in the mirror a bit and thinking, how far is too much criticism? We've obviously, we don't want to touch on the name, but, a couple of articles, circulate around the media, that sort of criticism isn't, you wouldn't say warranted. But like you said, Lockie, those people who want to see the Matildas do well, that's the sort of positive feedback that, we need to, really push football forward in this country. Have those, good debates, open discussions, because if we're just happy to be there for the experience. So how many times have we been in that position before? We need to be at a stage now where, we're at the top competing against these elite nations. There shouldn't be any more excuses, because now the young Matildas coming up, there's a lot of talent coming through the ranks there. Obviously, the next coach is going to be pivotal decision for that next phase in terms of that development and, the future generation. So, yeah, there's a lot going for us. But, yeah, at the same time, that criticism is warranted, I think, but it just can't get to the stage where it gets too far, where it's, we're just sort of trying to bash the Matildas and it's not, it doesn't do anyone any good.
Yeah, the sweet spot lies somewhere in the middle, doesn't it? And Poletti, I'll let you have your word on this as well. But for me, it boils down to a little line where you could say that the effect that the Matildas have had since the Women's World Cup have only been as significant it has been because they were winning. And yes, they've done all these inspiring things and they've inspired hundreds of thousands of kids to sign up and play football. But if they, only made it to the groups, then it would have been a certain amount. If they made it to the quarterfinals, it would have been a little bit more, and the semi-finals a little bit more after that. So you got to be winning for all these things to have an effect as well.
Yeah, you do. With all this sort of criticism that's really come along, and you mentioned the other side of it as well, the sweet spot does lie in the middle, because if you go too far to either extreme, this is what some of these articles have done, going to the extreme on the critical put down side of things, you go to the extreme on the other side, it very much what I've been terming as toxic positivity, in the sense that you can have too much positivity if all you're doing is cheerleading and choosing to look over some of the negatives that are there. And you need to find that sweet spot in the middle where it's like, yes, we need to encourage these players to do well and we want them to be rewarded and thanked and all this for their efforts. But at the same time, if they're having a poor performance, you need to be able to call it out. And I think, and I know social media in and of itself is very much a bubble that lends to this. But when you're trying to have some sort of, I guess you'd call it nuanced debate, constructive criticism, and do it in a way that still respects what the side's accomplishing, but that sweet spot in the middle is still getting shut down simply because you've got too much toxicity, too much of this toxic positivity going the other way, where it's like, no, you can't say anything bad about this side. And again, I know social media is a bubble in and of itself, but you go too far the other side and it just does no one any good. And so I think, places like us here having these sorts of discussions like we've done throughout the Olympics, there's other podcasts that do the same, that do similar things. Being able to find that sweet spot, and you're not going to be able to please everybody. And I think we all understand that not being able to please everybody is fine. But I think if we can find that sweet spot where it's like, yes, we can celebrate this side, because we have to remember, if we go back to the Olympic qualifiers, it was being sweated on, the end of that group stage. We were, I don't have the math off the top of my head, but we weren't too far from drawing either Japan or North Korea in those qualifiers. And if that happens, there's every chance we don't make it to the Olympics. And And, yes, we've got the Women's Asian Cup coming up on home soil, but we went out of the last one in the quarterfinals to South Korea. We should have, as host nation, we should have the easiest group drawing in, but we usually, like the Matildas usually batter these sides anyway to advance to the knockouts. That you get drawn in these groups. Like I remember 19-0 against Indonesia, I want to say off the top of my head, at the last Asian Cup, and it ended in a quarterfinal exit. One bad result at that tournament, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be our group, and we're drawing a side like Japan in the quarterfinals, and oh boy, that gives me the heebie-jeebies just thinking about it, and we're still 18 months away from that tournament.
Can I just add as well, sorry, massive credit to James Johnson for coming out front in the media, because it could have been so easy just to hide it, not say anything until later on. At least he's come out and cleared the air, just to put these rumours to bed, because like we've said, they are rubbish, what's been circulating in the media. And I think, JJ, from the time, he stepped in as the executive CEO of Football Australia, I think, his leadership has been really there for all to see, on full display. He's fronted up every single time, discussed the big issues. Just wanted to say massive credit to him.
Yeah, it would have been so easy to put a press release out and say, "Oh, we were disappointed in our performance at Paris," because you sort of get the idea. Like, he knows what questions are coming. It's just how they're being asked and whatnot. But he could have said most of these quotes in a press release, put it out, and been like, "Yep, that's my job."
And we've seen that
in
the past so many times, even with the APL. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, I agree with you. And, Johnson also said as part of this press stand-up that one of Football Australia's priorities would be to get a new coach in, of course, after to replace Tony Gustafsson. But what should be their number one priority, Poletti, and that's getting some quality FIFA Pro licensed balls from Deploy Football into their competitions, or you could get some perfectly sublimated kits on 15-day turnarounds with no locking contracts either. That would go all right.
I think the Football Australia's number one priority should be whoever the next coach is, capping Kayla Morrison and getting her in the back line.
Or let me give you this. You could get Deploy Football because they offer the best value for money on footballs, teamwear and equipment. They're proudly Australian-owned and operated since 2012, have the largest range of specific footballs, and have partners all over the country. Thank you to Deploy Football for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. But Football Australia will look to appoint a new head coach for the Matildas, but they're not in any particular rush, are they?
No, they're not. So this was very much one of the key talking points of this press conference on Sunday, was the finding of a new coach and how they're going to go about it. And he's very deliberate in his wording, specifying on multiple different occasions that they want to find the right coach. And he very much emphasized it's the right coach. There's no time frame on this search. He said, it might take 1 month. It could take 3 months to 6 months. Like, there's no time frame either. He hasn't named an interim coach in the meantime, or Football Australia haven't named an interim coach in the meantime, because the next window isn't until October. And there's every chance that they might have found a coach by then, or they might not have. So we'll have to wait and see on that. He did confirm that those games would be in Europe. But the other thing as well is that there's 7 windows between now and the Asian Cup, and they're all friendly windows. There's no competitive matches. So they've got time to find this right coach, and make sure that they get the best person and the right person for the job. He wouldn't talk specifically about any coaches either, because Joe Montemuro's name was raised here. He did praise Joe Montemuro, but just didn't want to go into too much depth about commenting specifically on one coach. I think that this is definitely going to be the right approach. In terms of, and there's that word again, right. It's popped up a lot in the last couple of minutes. But I think making sure that you do the best job possible to get the best coach for the role, because this is going to be a very critical time for the Matildas, and James touched on this as well, in that, the edict of the Tony Gustafsson era was to both build depth in the squad and win trophies. Well, that's going to be the case going forward as well, because we're going to have player retirements. There's going to be some players who are moving towards their mid-30s. that may not be around for the World Cup. They may not be around for the Los Angeles Olympics in 2028, pending qualification for both those tournaments. And so there's no guarantees that, that we're going to be able to rely on the same players that we have now. And so it's very much needing to build this depth, and that's coming through the junior programs as well. There's a lot of money being invested in the pathways for the Matildas, and I very much think that I don't think we'll see a coach named proper by the October window. I think this is very much going to move into that 3 to 6 month search time frame at a minimum, just because of the sheer amount of coaches that are out there that the FA is going to look under. They said they're going to look under every single rock to find this coach. And then the other key quote I wanted to pick out here, we've been doing our work. We know the market well. We went through a thorough process before we hired Tony Gustafsson, and we've continued to monitor the market ever since. And that says a lot, that they knew that there might be a time and place where they were going to have to move on from Tony. I would think they would have been hoping that they would have been able to sign Tony to another deal because he's won the World Cup and he's won gold at the Olympics. And it's like, yeah, why fix something that isn't broken? But clearly they know what the options are that are available to them, and maybe someone pops up that might not have been there previously. But they've got a starting block, but I still think it's going to take a while before they get their coach.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just good planning and, smart business to have those names in mind. And to me, that line further rules out Joe Montemurro as well for me. If they were really that proactive in the last months and years and keeping an eye on the market, then they would have been aware of his situation and conversations would have been had before he signed with Leon. So that's just my opinion, but we'll have to wait and see. I think you're right, Poletti. I think that 3 to 6 month window is much more likely. Measured and deliberate rather than quick seems the right option. The full A-League Men's 24-25 season fixture has been released. There are some more details that we didn't have on Friday's episode. There will be 15 more Saturday fixtures than last season based on club and fan feedback. The Summer of Football campaign is also back over the December-January period. There's going to be 11 midweek fixtures during the January school holiday period because we do have 2 full rounds of A-League football that need to be played midweek, just how the calendar fits in. The buys will be used somewhat strategically, at least with the Mariners and Sydney FC's Asian commitments. I did bring up a couple of weeks ago that there potentially could be scope to manage buys with those midweek games as well, but I guess if you're cramming them all in to one period, it doesn't allow that as much, which is fair enough. And there was also a line that the A-League Women's season info would be coming at least in another couple of weeks. But the big one for me, Jacob, that stands out is that Saturday double headers are now on Channel 10. So instead of one on Saturday, one on Sunday on the TV network on Channel 10, obviously not the main channel, but one game Saturday, one game Sunday on Network 10 that we had last year, we're going to have back-to-back on Saturday, so 5 p.m. and 7:35. And the key for me, Jacob, is what do you do in between? You can't just have a camera pointing in an open field and hope viewers stick along like we've seen before. You need to have something in the middle. So hopefully this means the return of some kind of Super Saturday panel program that bridges the gap between those two games.
They could hire us. I mean,
we are available.
We'd happily do it.
Imagine that.
No, we were at one point top 10 football podcasts in Australia on Apple Podcasts. So just to toot our own horn a little bit there. But no, you're right. It's definitely a case of they need to figure out how that sort of changeover is going to work because. Like you said, you can't just have nothing there and expect people to stick around and continue to watch. You need to make it obvious that there is another game to come, and whether it's, it can act as almost a bumper preview of that game, or if it's, you can spend some time looking back at the game that you've just had, whatever it might be, that there needs to be something in there because, otherwise it'll be like watching some of the, Oz Cup streams where it is just, they just sort of zoom in at the halfway line for half time. And there's really not a whole lot going on. And people are not interested in that. And I can't say I'm playing them.
Even when Fox Sports had the rights, you obviously had Match Day Saturday. That was really good. On that Saturday, I think it was like 5 p.m. Even when you had the Wellington games beforehand, it was just a great sort of segue into just previewing for that primetime Saturday night match. And that's something similar that I think, the A-League should look at this season. But it's interesting because, Stan Sport, I've been watching a bit of the Olympics, and, Tara Russian's been hosting that. Adam Peacock, as well, who used to host Matchday Saturday. He's on Stan now a bit more full-time with the Champions League. But I think we just got to be careful about, trying to keep on broadcasters like Tara Russian, because obviously she's a great presenter. Just keep these great, broadcasters on the network. I know, like, financially, the league's struggling a bit, the APL. But yeah, just from that aspect, if we can keep that sort of intact and try and, organise a half an hour preview show, for the prime time, I think that's definitely a step in the right direction.
But I also think that this is an opportunity as well to blood in new talent as well.
Yeah, definitely.
How many of the same faces and the same people and the same voices are we seeing and hearing season on season on season? And it's, what you're going to get with them. Whereas this is also a chance now to go, right, well, we can have, one of these established figures sort of, hosting this panel show, and then we can have a couple of people who, have been around for a while but haven't necessarily had their chance to, get onto the broadcasting side of things for whatever reason, and, give them the platform there. And, it sort of opens up these new avenues of discussion rather than the same talking points over and over again, which, I think that's something as well that people are going to want to watch, if it's something new and something different rather than necessarily just the same thing as they would get, any other weekend.
And I will give credit where credit's due. They've brought in the likes of Daniel Georgescu, Roy O'Donovan's had more of a run. So there is this new ex-player talent coming through. And we've seen, Tara Rushton do a lot of the hosting, but like Neve Owens has come through. She's also done a bit of work as a sideline reporter. So they are starting to move people through. And on the commentary side, they've done an absolute fantastic job with this, particularly with the A-League women. Georgia Rajic, Taryn Hedo, Pakua Frimpong, really coming to their own in the last couple of years. Our very own Chris McPherson. So I think that there is more of a scope to do things. Certainly, I just think that because, and I remember hearing this, and I could be wrong off the top of my head, but I believe that those that are appearing on the 10 network have separate contracts to those that are appearing just in general, even though it's all done by the same production company, because there's a different platform, there's different contracts in place. I'm not 100% sure if that's true, but it's something I did remember hearing at one point or another. It will be on 10 Bold. I imagine what they'll do is, because remember when it was just the one game, it was that half-hour pre-game show. So I imagine coverage will start at 4:30. You'll get your half-hour pre-game in before the first game. And then they'll just go straight through. So when the first game ends, instead of starting a new broadcast at 7 o'clock, it'll just be continuation, your post-game into your preview. Because the Saturday night game, 7:45 kickoff, their coverage started at 7 o'clock. Not a lot you can do. There's a lot of time to fill in those 45 minutes, even with commercials. So going through, you chop 10 minutes off. It'll be a nice, seamless transition. I remember the first year of Paramount Plus, when there were multiple games in a day with the A-League men's competition, they had that continuous stream that ran through, and then they stopped it for season 2. So it might be something you need to look at bringing back if you're going to do this back-to-back coverage, and it's become a vocal point of the free-to-air television side of things, and continue that stream on Paramount Plus, because you'll get that stream all the way through on 10 Play. But if you don't do it on Paramount Plus, then I think there is an opportunity lost there.
Yep, 100%. The other key thing to come out of this fixture release is that the summer period has been extended by a month. We're not changing the calendars here or anything, but in terms of the heat policy and the way fixtures are set up, it will run from round 6 to round 24, so that's majority of the season now. That means no 3 p.m. kickoffs, apart from a few exceptions for time zone and broadcast commitment purposes. But more games later in the day. Of course, we know the heat policy has been a little bit controversial, but as part of this release, they've said it's relatively conservative in comparison to international standards. So obviously player welfare is important, but it looks like, that summer period with those kickoffs being pushed later, a couple of extra rounds this year, so more late kickoffs and probably a few more double-ups as well. And as we get more teams in the league, people are just going to have to deal with that.
And one more actually interesting talking point, and this is not me getting excuses out of the way for Adelaide United early, but looking at their fixtures, they have bye round 1 and bye on the final round of the season, which means that they have the most compact fixtures schedule of any team in the league. That's not me getting excuses out the way early, because I don't think they're going to do very well anyway. That's a different story. But I just thought that was something interesting. It was somebody was going to have the most compact bit, because somebody was going to have the bye on the last round.
They're going to do even worse.
Adelaide have the bye on the last round and the bye in the first round, which was quite interesting. So
Adelaide conspiracy, Jacob. They're out to get the SA grade campaign. They want to derail it.
That's right.
Lucky as well.
They feel threatened.
Lucky with the exceptions as well. Is that with the AFC schedule? So just say if Sydney and Central Coast are travelling, will that time zone, will that come into play or not really?
The summer period will have no effect on AFC competition. Okay. No. Yep, no, just for the A-Leagues, those rules apply. Well, it wasn't in the A-Leagues, but it was an all A-League clash in the Australia Cup on Saturday night between Melbourne City and Perth Glory. It turned into an absolute cup classic by the end. 5-4 after extra time. Christian. Yeah, I mean, it's a preseason game, high scoring, as we've said. It's just kind of didn't really know what hit us.
Yeah, I mean, we saw Perth's previous game in the Australia Cup, I believe they played against Brisbane, and we saw David Drilich's system, come into full effect. The high pressing, real intensive effort, and that was the same from the get-go. From memory, I think they scored an early goal against Brisbane, and in this game as well, they scored in the third minute against City, and that just sort of set the floodgates open to, just goals, because on the defensive side of the ball, it wasn't pretty viewing. There's a lot of mistakes, a lot of hiccups here and there, but again, that's what you sort of expect we're in pre-season at the end of the day. It's a couple of months to go until the start of the campaign. So, I mean, from that perspective, it is understandable. But at the same time, for neutrals, it was a great spectacle, great entertainment. But for Perth Glory early on, I mean, if they sort of trend in this sort of right direction, I think we could be seeing a smoky for finals football if they keep at it, because, if they're producing this type of football early, seriously, with the attacking intent and the football they're playing at the moment, and that's only 2 games in. How many training sessions has Julich had on the park to really set his ideas in stone? So I know it's early days. I've said it before, but at the same time, compared to their season last season, when they sort of fell off the rails a bit, Lockie was hyping them up, saying, "Oh yeah, they're going to win the championship." Nah,
everyone was. I didn't say
they're outside chance to make finals. Not.
I mean, you can't talk. You were hyping Adelaide up into second place.
Yeah, that was early on though. That was 6, 7, 8 games in. That
was Christmas. The season had already been halfway done by then.
That's about 6, 7, 8 games in. No, I'm joking. No. I mean, my prediction, you can't take me seriously with predictions anyway, can you?
That's so true.
No, but with this game anyway, obviously went to extra time and you're thinking, yeah, it's anyone's game. But then obviously that late goal from Nathaniel Blair, scoring a brace in this game, really promising as well. Had a great game, not just besides the 2 goals. Thought he was really effective throughout the match. And yeah, City have, a couple of problems that they've got to fix up. Obviously last season, it wasn't smooth sailing from, went through a couple of coaching changes. But hopefully they can find a bit more stability. But from a Perth perspective, tag it on the score sheet again. They're playing some nice football early on. Let's just see if they can keep this up.
Yeah, I think looking at this game, big season for Max Caputo. We know that Jamie McLaren's gone out of the side. The word that we're hearing is that Caputo is going to be able to have pre-season to earn his starting spot. He got a nice goal, City's first in this game, a good near post run, tucked away a header nicely into the corner. I just think it's a big season for him. The void of Jamie McLaren is there to be filled. They've given him an early sign of trust, and it's up to him to take it. And so far, out of the kind of young strikers that we've seen come onto the A-League scene, he's definitely been one of the best performers, at least in my opinion. So a big season for him coming up. But I think a couple of other young Perth Glory youngsters really impressed as well. Jacob, you got Faisal, who scored, I think 3 now, alongside Nathaniel Blair in their first 2 games for the club. Of course, most of their squad is young, apart from a couple of, David Williams, Brandon O'Neill, those kinds of players. So lots of youngsters in there, but they're doing all right so far.
Yeah, it's a Glory side that do look pretty confident. They look like the team that they were in that stretch last season where they were almost unbeatable at home, right? And they have sort of a swagger about them where they just feel like they know they're going to get a result. No matter what, and that's what you get with some of these young players, right? Because they do come onto the scene, and it's their first experience playing professional football, and it's sort of a sink or swim thing. Where if you don't have that sort of almost egotistical confidence about you, you're not necessarily going to get very far. So these players do sort of have to back themselves a bit, and they do have this confidence about them, and the team, you can see it as well. Already very early on seemed to be gelling quite well with this system that Zdrilic has put in place, and even the players that he's brought in have been clearly pretty well targeted to sort of fit the system that Perth are looking to play. I thought Josh Risdon was tremendous in the first half from right back. I thought really opened the game up for the Glory because of the way that he was used in the press, pushed him really high up the pitch, but it allowed that right winger to move inside and pressure the centre backs. But it also meant that the midfield didn't have to push up as high to pressure the centre-backs because you had the winger coming inside, so it kept the solidity in the midfield, which meant that City just had a really tough time playing through the press. I thought that was tremendous, and he did a really good job there. But yeah, it's going to be a case of, I think, across the league, a season for the youngsters to go out there and show what they're about, because obviously we've spoken extensively about it, but a lot of clubs are sort of in cost-cutting mode at the moment, and they're going to be looking to rely on the backbone of young players. And that's, in addition to teams that were already doing that, like the Mariners, like Adelaide United have already been doing for years. More and more teams are going to have to start doing this, and City are one of them. You don't have Jamie McLaren, which is a huge loss. I mean, he didn't have a great season last season, but you can't deny his talent, right? And he's gone to Mohun Bagan, and they are absolutely in love with him already over there, and have high expectations for him. So it is big shoes to fill for Max Caputo. So that's where I think it's also a case of City need to temper their expectations, because he's not going to come in and he's not going to be Jamie McLaren. But you've got to give him the chance to do that, right? You've got to get the squad and the team around him that's able to feed him the balls into advantageous areas where he can get, good shots on goal and create chances and things like that. Because if you just hang him out to dry and go, oh, well, he's not Jamie McLaren. Well, of course he's not. He's Max Caputo, right? They've got different skill sets and they're different players. I think he's a very, very talented player, but I think it's about City acknowledging that they might have to play slightly differently to be able to get the best out of him, and sort of move away from what's been quite a McLaren-centric City for so long now, where a lot of the players been coming from out wide in the wings and getting the ball into McLaren to do his thing and finish the ball off in the box. We might need to see a change in that for City to be able to bring Caputo into the game a bit more. So it's a lot of work for Vidmar to do, naturally, to try and go, right, we've got this youngster who's a little bit of an unknown, because he hasn't had a huge number of minutes, but we can see the talent that he does have. He scored for us in the Cup against Perth. Let's bring him in and let's see what he can do, and let's put a squad around him as well that's going to be able to support him and get him the chances that he needs.
He has a level head as well, very mature, because I interviewed him last year during the season, and you just tell he loves to learn, absorb, every ounce of, learning possible. Obviously, he told me stories of, Jamie McLaren used to drive him home sometimes, just getting all these pieces of information, just trying to learn off the best striker we've seen in the A-League statistically. And to have that knowledge and, I guess, that experience already, such as a young kid, I think that will do him wonders. So yeah, very exciting prospect.
Is there anyone you haven't interviewed, Christian?
You, Poletti, yes.
I wonder how that piece would rate. We have, of course, 7 more games to finish off the round of 32 this week in the Australia Cup. We've talked before about South and Wellington Phoenix. Wellington confirming earlier yesterday that they're leaving a couple of players behind. So Alex Rufer, Tim Payne, and new signing Paulo Retre have not travelled. Of course, they are still looking for a goalkeeper. Albie Kelly-Hill, brother of Lucas, will be between the sticks for this one. Of course, if you want to have a look at how we think these games will play out, you can go to our YouTube channel at Roundball Australia and have a look at our predictions game. As part of that, I tried to say that South Melbourne would come into this game winning the Doherty Cup, which of course they did on the weekend with a penalty victory over Oakley. I'm not getting any credit.
Doesn't count as a prediction.
No.
It doesn't count as a prediction. That was made very clear to me. Go watch the video. But a couple of very exciting matches in this round. We've talked about Lambton Jaffers and Victory as well. A couple of all NPL clashes. But the one we're going to highlight today is actually Melbourne Serbia versus the Modbury Jets. Now, Poletti, Melbourne Serbia coming in from the third tier of Victorian football. Just the fact that they have reached the final stage of the Australia Cup is astounding in itself.
Yeah, the VPL2 side, I'm not going to pretend like I know a ton about them other than what I've heard on the NPL Victoria podcast. But by all accounts, they're having a fantastic season. And it wouldn't be the first time we've seen an NPL South Australia side travel to Victoria and struggle. So I think that this isn't going to be an easy walkover for the Modbury Jets by any stretch of the imagination. And if you want to find out more about them, if you're as unfamiliar with NPL South Australia as I am, you can head over to roundballaustralia.com.au. Our leader of the SA Grey campaign, Antonis Pagonis, has wrote a fantastic piece. Ignore the Campbelltown City part of it because I think they got knocked out last week. So, so that might be a sign of things to come for the Modbury Jets. Speak to Antonis, you get knocked out of the cup. No. Look, honestly, go give that piece a read. Cracking read if you haven't done so already. And I'm actually looking forward to seeing what Melbourne Serbia can pull out tomorrow night.
Yep, it's going to be a great watch for sure. Let's get to some transfer news in the A-League and football. That's FUTBOL Australia is reporting that Nicholas Milanovic's assumed move to Dinamo Zagreb has fallen through. The 22-year-old has 1 year left on his contract at the Western Sydney Wanderers. Christian, if this news is true and this move has broken down, that's very unfortunate for him. Benefit for the A-League, of course, because we've seen a large exodus of quality players this off-season. And to keep Nicholas Milanovic around for another year would definitely do things for the Wanderers and the league as well.
Yeah, you can see from both sides. Obviously, from the Wanderers' angle, it's a massive move to keep him. Obviously, it wasn't of their choice. The move's fallen through for different reasons. But in terms of Milanovic's development, around that age of 22, 23, even 21, that's sort of the time where you want to be making that move abroad and trying to test yourself in the top leagues and around Europe. But again, an extra year in the A-League won't hurt him, obviously. I'm sure he'll get plenty of other opportunities and extra suitors come the season after, or if there might be a few clubs swooping in the next few weeks' time, who knows. But yeah, last season Milanovic probably had, arguably his breakout year. Even with the young Socceroos getting a few call-ups there. And yeah, even with the Wanderers, sort of one of the bright spots under Marco Rudan last season that really shone through. And, in that midfield area where I think they really did struggle in parts, he was a shining light, down on the flank, really versatile. So yeah, for the Wanderers, you don't complain. Obviously, they'll keep him for an extra year, and hopefully he can propel the club to make finals this time.
A couple other rumours that we've talked about have now been confirmed. Mitch Langerak to Melbourne Victory on an 18th-month deal that will start at the turn of the year after he's finished his J1 commitments with Nagoya Grampus in December. Jongtae Wook from Korea has gone to the Western Sydney Wanderers. That has been announced on a season-long loan. Now, here's an interesting one for you. Jacob, you wrote a very good piece on Bart Vriens when he was announced relatively unknown player to Australian markets. We might have to get you to do another one on Nikos Virgos, a Greek striker, could be on his way potentially to Melbourne Victory. 28-year-old has found most of his playing time in Greece across multiple clubs so far in his career. The report from the Greek Herald indicated that the player expressed a desire to continue his career in Australia following an offer received. That's from his previous club. Now, Virgos was reportedly in conversation with Victory last season, which is where this link comes from. It's interesting. We've talked a little bit about Victory's succession plan. Of course, Bruno Fornarelli's not going to be around forever. They've signed Jing Reek, who got a double on debut, friendly debut, it must be said, against Green Gully. But apparently another foreign striker is on the target for Victory.
Yeah, well, and Fornarelli, is he signed on for next season, or is he still an unknown at this point?
I'm not
I don't think he's signed on, has he?
I was under the impression he wasn't signed on.
Yeah, so this could indicate that potentially that they can't reach an agreement, and Fornarelli could be on his way out. Obviously, speculation. But no, this is another one where it's a foreign player that yeah, I had never heard of until these reports started to come out that he had these links to the Victory. So you're right, Lockie. I might have to do a bit of research on him, analyze some of his game tape for the benefit of all of our fabulous readers, of course. But no, it's definitely interesting because I think it paints a picture more of the situation at Victory more than anything, right? In that they are looking to bring in another striker, right? Because, yeah, like you said, they've brought in Jing already. Fornaroli may or may not be on contract next year. This would be a third striker on top of that, which, you know, is quite a lot for a team that typically plays with just one up front as well. They have the lone number 9 rather than some of the teams in the league who prefer to play with 2 strikers. So it definitely seems to suggest that either this is a succession plan for the Victory, like you mentioned, Lockie, and they're going to try and bed him in this season and then, you know, give him the reins the season afterwards, or it could be a case of, well, they're not entirely confident on keeping Fornaroli around in the first place, and you know, it's better to be early on these things and try and get in players, you know, when you can, rather than having to rush to it after, you know, the contract talks fall through. So it'd be interesting to see if this report comes true, and then the fallout from that in terms of whether that means that Fornaroli hasn't signed on, or whether it means that this is just the Victory trying to be a little bit proactive in terms of setting themselves up for future seasons.
He played a season for Real Madrid B.
Did he?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Not actually played very much, though.
It says 25 appearances.
Was it 25?
Had 5 goals, so I think he went out on loan there.
Not bad.
He
Well,
was
yeah,
online,
I'll have to
Interesting.
definitely have to look into him because that could make for an interesting piece.
Yeah.
We'll have to do some more digging on Bruno because I've just had a look to the press release when he was announced and it didn't actually mention a contract length. So we'll have to do some more digging. But he did play that friendly against Green Gully.
Right.
So who knows? We'll have to do some more digging and see what ends up there. Go to the other end of the football career spectrum. 15-year-old Bessian Kutleshi becomes the youngest Western United player ever to sign a professional contract. That's on scholarship terms for 3 years. He's a centre-back that played in the Joey's Under-16 ASEAN Championships triumph a couple of weeks ago. So he's won a continental trophy, which is pretty cool. They pinched him from Melbourne City, Poletti, which is an interesting one. His brother has been at the Western United Academy already, so I'm sure that was part of the reasoning. He is a boy from the West, so he's going home, so to speak, if you want to draw that line to it. But apparently one of Australia's best up-and-coming young players in his age group. And Western United continue to add to what is continually being talked about as one of the stronger academies in the league.
I wonder how much of a selling point Ironbark Fields was, the Tarneit Regional Football Facility. I think the fact that they've got their own stadium probably helps. I don't know how much time he'll spend playing there, but given he's 15 years old on a scholarship contract.
Straight into first-team training, apparently.
Oh, well, that
doesn't surprise me either, given the quality of their defence last season.
That's very high praise. Then, if you're sticking him straight into first team training, so they pinched him from Melbourne City. So when he heads home, the winner in one of these many Melbourne derbies that all the Melbourne sides play with each other, do you reckon the City fans are going to boo him? You didn't want him.
You didn't want him. You didn't want him. Just Graham Arnold appears in the touchline. You didn't want him. Okay. Oh, what if he then grows up? He has like another nation that he's attached to, and then he plays for Australia, and then you didn't want. Okay. I'm
trying to flip the script here.
So you usually have a go at me for doing this, going a little bit too far with the joke.
Yeah, that was. You know what my issue was? I just realised my next question also was going to be to you, and I tried to make a little bit of conversation, but it hasn't landed. So I'm just going to ask you the question. Jamila Rankin, Poletti, has left Melbourne Victory and is off to Germany.
Yep. So she joined Melbourne Victory in August of last year. And she's left a year later. It's a 3-year deal with Hoffenheim in the Frauen Bundesliga. My German's not great, so I'm going to hope I got that right.
Sounded better than your French.
Anything could have sounded better than my French. Insert clip here of me attempting to speak French. No, we won't subject our listeners to that.
Lost in the archive.
Yeah. The club said... through Director of Football John Didaluca that they were proud to be able to provide the springboard for Rankin to begin her journey in Europe. They would have loved to keep her, but the opportunity to move comes along. you'd be very harsh to prevent a move like this. She's played for the U17 side. She's played for the newly created under 23 side of the national team level as well. That side coached by Mel Andrietta and established under the reign of which Tony Gustafson was in charge of the national team program. A lot of investment had to come from Football Australia, of course, to set that program up, but it just allows for that continued development of players who aren't quite ready to track into the Matildas, and Jamila Rankin falls into that category. Although the move to Germany might suggest otherwise. But no, so definitely a good move for her. And I think Victory are very much going to miss her defensive efforts throughout the season.
All right, very good. There is your transfer wrap and your episode of the Round Ball Australia podcast. Thanks again to Deploy Football for supporting our show and our coverage of the beautiful game in Australia. Jacob Stevens, thank you for your company tonight.
It's a right pleasure as always, Lockie.
Christian Montegan, thank you.
Great to be here, Lockie.
And Poletti.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much for listening. We'll be back on Friday covering the 7 games in the round of 32 of the Australia Cup. But thank you all very much for listening. Goodbye.